been very blessed. We've had the same crew for 13 years. We wouldn't be where we're at without Frank. It's hard to talk about still just because it's so new.
For a decade, Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz were the brothers of the road, the inseparable duo of American pickers. But that on-screen chemistry was a lucrative lie. When Frank suffered a life-threatening stroke, the brotherhood didn't save him. It erased him. While Frank lay fighting for his life, Mike Wolfe allegedly orchestrated his removal. The tragedy of Frank's recent passing exposed the cold reality. This wasn't a friendship that fell apart. It was a business arrangement designed from the very first mile to ensure that while Mike became the mogul, Frank would always remain the disposable passenger. But to understand why this betrayal was inevitable, we have to look at the cracks that formed before the first episode ever aired. The bond that built an empire. Before the History Channel fame and multi-million-dollar deals, their bond was forged in the dust of Iowa garages where two misfits found a common language in junk. Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz weren't Hollywood creations or actors in a prepackaged show. They were the real deal, two guys from Davenport, Iowa, who had known each other since middle school. They were outsiders, kids who didn't fit the football crowd, finding a shared obsession in the grease and rust of the American past. Bonding over classic motorcycles, old oil cans, and the thrill of the hunt, they spent decades hustling together, digging through barns, sheds, and basements long before cameras were present. This wasn't a show concept, it was their life. They were a perfect complementary pair. Mike was the visionary, the restless, fast-talking dreamer, seeing potential in every rust pile. Frank was the bearded charmer, the old-school haggler with a dry wit and relatable, grumpy charm. Mike had the big dream, a way to turn their weekend passion into an empire. But it was a hard sell. Mike spent 5 years pitching the concept to any network that would listen. Executives in New York and LA didn't get the appeal of two guys in a beat-up van digging through garbage. Mike was the engine, but he knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed his partner. He needed Frank. Frank was the anchor. He was the relatable, everyman counterpunch to Mike's intense drive. Without Frank's grounded, often hilarious skepticism, the pilot doesn't sell. When the History Channel finally said yes, it was a shared dream. Two Iowa brothers, the ultimate underdogs, taking on the world. On January 18, 2010, American Pickers premiered, becoming an instant cultural phenomenon. The timing was perfect. Amidst the Great Recession, two regular guys living the American dream, pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, one rusty sign at a time, resonated deeply. The show was a monster hit, drawing over 5 million viewers an episode, making it one of cable's most profitable shows. Mike and Frank were suddenly recognizable faces across America. But this is where the ticking time bomb was set. That's where the poison started. The public saw two equals splitting the spoils 50-50. But the contracts told a different story. Mike Wolfe wasn't just the co-host. He was the creator and executive producer. He owned the brand. Frank Fritz was arguably just talent. In the cold, hard language of a network deal, he was the beloved but replaceable co-star. Mike was the boss. Frank was the employee. For the first few years, this imbalance didn't matter. They were on the road, having fun, getting rich. But that subtle difference in status was the fault line that would later rupture everything. As the show conquered America, the fault line widened. The looming shadow of their roles emerged. Mike, the savvy entrepreneur, capitalized on the fame. He launched Antique Archaeology, a massive retail operation with locations in LeClaire, Iowa, and Nashville, Tennessee. He became a brand, launching clothing lines and side businesses. He was the mogul, and Frank was just Frank. He was the picker. He loved the road, the haggle, the junk. He didn't build a separate empire. His passion wasn't branding, it was the hunt. While Mike built a corporate headquarters, Frank was in the van. He later revealed the pay structure reflected this, implying Mike made significantly more. The brotherhood was slowly morphing into a boss and employee relationship. The playful jabs in the van developed a harder edge. The public chalked it up to an old married couple dynamic, but behind the scenes was the deep resentment of a man becoming a sidekick in his own life. Frank felt underappreciated, while Mike saw himself as the visionary carrying the weight of the brand. This silent rift festered for a decade, ready to be shattered by a crisis Frank never saw coming. The betrayal in the silence. At the absolute apex of their fame, while millions watched them laugh on screen, Frank Fritz quietly vanished into a private health nightmare, and Mike Wolfe allegedly used that exact moment to push him out. American Pickers wasn't just a show, it was a global empire. It was the undisputed flagship of the History Channel, and Mike and Frank were the kings of rusty gold. Their brotherhood wasn't just the show's premise, it was the entire brand. Then, in 2020, Frank Fritz vanished. He was there in one episode, and in the next, he was gone. New episodes featured Mike picking alone, or with his other brother, Robbie. The network was silent. Mike Wolfe was silent. The truth, when it finally dripped out, was far more tragic than anyone imagined. This is the core reveal. Frank didn't quit. He was in the fight of his life. The bearded charmer the world loved was in agonizing, debilitating pain. Years of hunching over in barns and digging through steel had destroyed his body. He was suffering from severe Crohn's disease, but the real crisis was his back. It was completely shot. Frank had to step away for grueling, intensive back surgery. This was a massive operation, leaving him with 185 stitches and 2 heavy-duty steel rods fused into his spine. The recovery was brutal. And to cope with the constant searing agony, Frank fell into a dangerous trap. He began to self-medicate, and his use of alcohol spiraled into a serious, life-threatening addiction. This wasn't a vacation. This was a man at his absolute weakest, fighting a war on 2 fronts. His body was in agony, and his mind was in a battle for sobriety. He did the right thing. He checked himself into a rehabilitation facility. He was doing the hard work, completely focused on one thing: getting better and getting back in the van. He's in a rehab facility, vulnerable, in pain, expecting a call from his brother, a text, anything, and the phone just stayed silent. Mike Wolfe never called. Not once. Frank, isolated and recovering, was reportedly watching his own show from his couch just like the rest of America. And he was watching himself be replaced. He was seeing Mike pick with his brother, Robbie, in his seat. The realization must have been cold and horrifying. He wasn't on medical leave. He was being erased. Heartbroken and furious, Frank finally broke his silence and gave a shocking interview to the press. The truth he revealed was devastating. Quote, "I haven't talked to Mike in 2 years. He knew my back was messed up, but he didn't call me up and ask how I was doing. That's just how it is." The betrayal was finalized not with a respectful phone call, but with a cold, corporate public statement. After Frank went public, Mike was forced to respond. He released a perfectly manicured PR statement, wishing Frank all the best on his next chapter. This was the kill shot. It was a public execution wrapped in the sterile corporate language of, "We wish you well." After a 30-year friendship, Frank learned he was officially off the show from the internet. He later confirmed he wanted to come back, but the decision had already been made. This wasn't just a breakup. This was a cold business decision. Frank's personal hell, his addiction, his pain, wasn't a crisis to be helped. It was a liability. It was the morals clause, excuse Mike needed to cut a problem loose. He didn't just replace his partner, he replaced his problem. And the betrayal was made complete by who replaced him. The show didn't just move on. It filled Frank's seat with Mike's actual brother, Robbie Wolfe. Think about the chilling message. The 30-year brother of the road was just a placeholder. The second he became difficult, he was swapped out for actual blood. The man who smiled and shook hands in dusty barns was, behind the scenes, a ruthless businessman. Frank wasn't a friend who was sick. He was a line item that had become too expensive. The tragic cost of erasure. The man who was a TV fixture for over a decade was suddenly gone, and the public was furious. The moment Frank's heartbreaking interview dropped, the entire facade of the American Pickers Brotherhood was shattered. The loyal audience who had built that show felt personally betrayed. They didn't just disagree with the decision, they revolted. The American Pickers social media pages became a digital war zone, flooded with thousands of angry messages. "No Frank, no watch. Mike is a snake. How could you do that to your brother?" This wasn't a minor internet squabble. It was a full-blown PR catastrophe. The very heart of the show, the central premise of 2 childhood friends, was now exposed as a cynical lie. The ratings began to plummet. Loyal viewers who had tuned in for 11 years were now actively boycotting the new episodes. Mike Wolfe was now the villain. His attempts at damage control, like his cold corporate statement, just confirmed everyone's worst fears. And this is the part of the story that moves from betrayal to pure tragedy. While this firestorm raged, Frank Fritz was fighting a much quieter, darker battle. That public firing, that total cold-shouldered isolation from his brother, it had consequences. Frank was now completely adrift. He had lost his job, his platform, and his identity. He was a man with chronic, agonizing physical pain, now dealing with the crushing emotional pain of being erased. The stress was immense. The isolation was total. He was at home in Iowa, cut off, watching his brother erase him from the public record. And that stress, that isolation, that grief, it took its final devastating toll. On July 14, 2022, Frank suffered a massive, catastrophic stroke. He was found on the floor of his home, alone. This wasn't just a medical event. It was the tragic climax of the stress and heartbreak he'd endured. The stroke was so severe, it left him completely incapacitated. The lovable, fast-talking, sharp-witted, bearded charmer was now non-verbal, paralyzed, and unable to care for himself. The man who lived for the freedom of the road was now trapped in his own body, silent. He was immediately placed under a strict legal conservatorship, losing all of his freedom. The news of the stroke hit the public like a second shockwave, and now all eyes turned to Mike Wolfe. It was Mike who announced the stroke to the world, posting a somber message on Instagram saying, "I have been very private in regards to Frank's life, and I pray for the best." But the public saw right through it. Where was this prayer for the last 2 years? Where was this friendship when Frank was in rehab, begging for his job? The post read like calculated, desperate damage control. Reports later surfaced that Mike did finally visit Frank in the hospital, but for many, it was a hollow gesture. It was a visit made not for Frank, who couldn't even speak, but for Mike's Instagram feed. It was the call he should have made 2 years earlier. Frank Fritz never recovered. He would spend the next 2 years of his life in a nursing facility. Then, on October 24th, 2024, the final tragic news broke. Frank Fritz was dead at the age of 61. Mike Wolfe, once again, led the public tributes, calling his old friend a dreamer and a brother. But Frank's tragic end is inseparable from his firing. The betrayal didn't just cost him his job, it arguably cost him his health. It cemented the cold, hard truth. In his darkest hour, the brother he helped make famous left him to face his demons, and ultimately his death, completely alone. The verdict on loyalty. So, how should we remember the brothers of the road, whose on-screen partnership became one of the most tragic and cold-blooded betrayals in reality TV history? We've seen their incredible rise from two misfit kids in Iowa to the faces of a global picking empire. We've uncovered the hidden, unequal power dynamic that festered for a decade, and the ruthless, shocking betrayal that saw Frank Fritz discarded the absolute moment he became sick, vulnerable, and a liability to the brand. But we've also followed the devastating human fallout. Frank's lonely spiral, the catastrophic stroke brought on by the stress of his isolation, and his final, tragic death. Their story is a dark cautionary tale about the corrosion of fame and the cold, hard truth that brotherhood is often just a marketing term. Frank Fritz is gone, and while the show continues, its heart is missing, leaving a legacy forever stained by the question of loyalty. But what do you think? Was Mike Wolfe a ruthless businessman protecting his brand from an unreliable partner? Or was this a cold-blooded betrayal of a 30-year friendship when Frank just needed help? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We have a new video just like this one coming next week. If you love digging deeper than the headlines, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss another video. If you loved this story, we've got more celebrity deep dives queued up for you. Just click the videos on your screen to continue. Thanks for watching.